Welcome. This is our 25th Thought Leadership webinar. And the idea of these webinars is every Tuesday and Thursday at the same time, 3:30 British Summer Time, we engage in a topic of debate, a topic that's at the forefront of enabling us to think constructively about the type of security that we're receiving now and how that might be improved in the future. That's what Thought Leadership does, it's a critique of what's going on now. And our topic today is a really interesting one that's been evolving from previous work. It's about making security technologies work. And the examples that are being highlighted are artificial intelligence and automated facial recognition. But the more general point about making security technologies work is key here. I'm very grateful to the BSIA, the British Security Industry Association, for sponsoring this webinar and for taking the lead in getting us to focus on this issue. What I'm going to do in a second is I'm going to invite our four panelists to introduce themselves. And once each of them have done that, I'll then invite them to make their opening statement, 3 minutes for them to give their views on a topic, on this particular topic. Once they've done that, we'll come to the audience and ask them to give you the chance to ask questions. Can you please use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen to ask your questions? The quicker you get your question in, by the way, the quicker we'll be able to incorporate it. So without further ado, let's get started. And let me ask our first panelist to introduce himself, Nick.
Hi, I'm Nick Fisher from FaceWatch. I'm the Chief Executive.
Thank you very much indeed. Mohammed.
Hi, I'm Mohammed Rashid, CEO and co-founder of Calypso.
Thank you very much indeed. And Jake.
Hi, Jake Parker. I'm Senior Director of Government Relations for the Security Industry Association, headquartered in the United States.
Thank you very much indeed. And finally, Pauline.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Pauline Nordstrom, the founder and CEO of AI innovation company Anaconda Consulting.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so I'm now going to ask each of our panelists to make their opening statement, just 3 minutes for them to put their views across on this topic. So let's go to Nick first. Nick Fisher, your opening statement, please.
Thanks, Martin. Well, pre-COVID-19, crime was on the increase, specifically in retail, but in many other sectors too. There are a number of potential reasons for this, specifically in relation to the UK. There are 21,500 less police officers than there were 10 years ago. That's about a 12 to 13% reduction in officers. However, over the same period, there was 35% new types of crime that didn't even exist 10 years ago. Police have gone very public in the UK and declared that they don't have the resources to attend crimes such as theft, burglary, general low-level crime. Let me state that, you know, big supporter of the police, like that on record, but they just don't have the resources to do the job, specifically around low-level crime. People and businesses, as a consequence, have become more apathetic towards reporting crime. Really, sort of the view is, well, nobody's coming, so what's the point? And I think that's compounded in the UK by the consequences or potential lack of consequences that are discharged on criminals by the courts. So you sort of lead yourself more towards a self-help environment, because currently today in the UK, the only winner is the criminal. As a new entrant into the world of security, because I'm a career retailer by heart, I think the security industry have some amazing technologies, but the biggest surprise to me is the lack of innovation of how the technology is applied, or even in some cases deployed. I've come across a sort of fixation with short-term immediacy rather than strategic long-term treatment towards crime. And there's an absolute fixation with recording and reporting crime, adding more cameras and things like that, where the police have already openly stated that and publicly stated that they don't have the resources to come out. The future, therefore, is about prevention and deterring crime, not about recording and reporting it. And so in commoditizing technologies like artificial intelligence, facial recognition, making it accessible, affordable, simple, and easy to deploy and for people to operate, would be a first and a major step into businesses realizing the material benefits in terms of reducing things like stock loss, but even more importantly, employee safety. And without question, and we've seen through recent deployments in our business, it's looking like the biggest introduction of technology since the introduction of CCTV. This all requires new thinking and strategies to be embraced by businesses, security companies, and even the general public in better understanding features and benefits of artificial intelligence, and also, from a personal view, less misleading and inflammatory reporting by some of the civil liberty groups. But one thing's for sure, post-COVID-19 is going to be a different place. Those sunny days of sitting in the garden with the government picking up the bill is about to end. And record unemployment, probably the biggest recession since the 1930s, and crime hitting all-time high levels is probably on the horizon. The proactive strategic thinking businesses that embrace new technologies such as AI, I think, give themselves a chance to survive, and the rest of those businesses out there, who knows how it's going to pan out for them.
Thank you very much indeed, Nick. I appreciate your opening statement. We'll come back to you on some of those issues, I'm sure. Questions at the bottom of your screen, audience. Question and answer at the bottom of your screen. Let's go to Mohammed. Mohammed, your opening statement, please.
Thank you, Martin. I'll start off by saying I'll agree with some of the points Nick has raised. I'm a new joiner in the security industry, and the first thing I saw was technology relied on after the crime has happened. And I think the future is about preventing the crime in the first place. I mean, at Calypso, we believe a world where the buildings are smart, the buildings can detect when someone is breaking in, the buildings can detect when there's a fire, and even the reactive systems or the response systems will be automatic, meaning when a building detects a burglar is coming in, the building will automatically notify an emergency service such as the police or the fire rescue service. And even those agencies may rely on technology such as robots or drones to respond to those incidents. And all of these things mean that we'll have less crime, less incidents happening in the future. And the way we get there is using technology, and AI definitely sits at the top of it. Personally, I think there are two main barriers to the effective deployment of technology over the next 10 to 15 years or so. Number one is understanding and really understanding the limitations of AI. And understanding the strengths. And number two, sharing those limitations and strengths with the audience, with the stakeholders. The biggest problem I see is missold technologies currently. Is people come in and they say, look, technology, this AI is a magical black box and it can do everything. And as a result, when customers try it, they're disappointed because they were told something else. I'd leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Some interesting points I'm sure our audience will pick up on there, Mohammed. Let's go next to Jake Parker for your opening statement, please, Jake.
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to say a word about SIA, just in case for those of you who may not be that familiar with us. We have about 1,000 members. Many of our members are global companies that are also involved in BSIA. I really appreciate your hosting us here. So we also have, we're about 60% manufacturers, and the rest are service providers and systems integrators. We have about nearly 30 companies who are leading developers of facial recognition technology. And so I'll actually kind of be addressing that really specifically within our theme today. So under the appropriate circumstances and proper oversight, we at SIA believe that facial recognition offers tremendous benefits for society. All technology developed by our industry, regardless of what it is, should only be used for legal, ethical, and non-discriminatory purposes. So we've taken a really strong stand against calls to ban this technology as misguided and extreme. It would jeopardize public safety, but also reverse the history of successful and responsible use in the United States, and the growing potential to dramatically improve our industry's ability to carry out its safety and security mission and support our customers in their efforts to protect lives and property. So in the US, just what's happened here in the last year, 8 local jurisdictions have banned the technology completely in the public sector. But these communities are clustered mainly around San Francisco and Boston. And in legislation we were tracking introduced in at least 16 states that would deal with facial recognition in some way. Then a handful of federal bills have been introduced, but none have gained significant traction so far. No state has enacted a ban at that level. And only one this year, in these sessions this year so far, has enacted some significant restrictions. And unfortunately, it is something that we're seeing now, is that the debate over facial recognition is being tied to some of the underlying social justice issues that we're facing in our country. We think that that's unfortunate, and that the implication is being made, especially in the media, that that's somehow contributing to those issues when it's really not. And I can get into more of that later. But why should security practitioners and folks in the industry care, about this issue? I think one is certainly that there's been a movement to the extreme among activist groups in trying to ban the technology, and in doing so, they're lumping together all facial recognition uses under one umbrella. And many of the uses that are very critical to our industry, such as uses for access control and security systems, are being lumped together and all labeled as surveillance and as mass surveillance tools. And that's certainly not the case. But as jurisdictions look at regulating the technology, we need to make sure that those uses are properly addressed and considered within those frameworks. But I think even if you don't deal with facial recognition, on a daily basis or as part of your work, you should also be concerned because there's lesser known agenda, but definitely articulated among some of these groups that are opposing the technology. They are also have an objective of limiting video surveillance technology, RFID, and many other types of video analytics. And so I think if this issue of facial recognition and what are the appropriate boundaries here is not handled the right way, this could be a precedent that could lead to unjustified restrictions on other technologies that are critical to our industry.
Jake, thank you very much indeed. And don't forget, question and answer button at your bottom of your screen, and we'll come to the audience straight after our final opening statement from you, Pauline.
Thank you very much. Well, I work with both UK and USA companies, and these points all resonate actually from the speakers so far. So my statement on this matter, the professional security industry has been using forms of AI for several decades to enable security operators to make fast, well-informed decisions to mitigate security threats. But in recent times, development of the deep learning neural networks, the power of cloud computing, faster, more reliable comms, IoT sensing technologies are generating an avalanche of vitally important security data which was not previously available. Now, AI can be used to automatically correlate and analyze this data and help the professionals to proactively, faster act to foil criminal activity, to respond to evolving threats, and to make people and places safe. So what I want to know is why the use of AI and automatic facial recognition by law enforcement agencies hits the headlines, when in contrast their use in the professional industry is generally seen as useful, safe, and uncontroversial. The professional security industry is governed through the highest standards, ethics, and legislation, which consider privacy impact assessments, proportionality, ownership, and accountability. But global technology players may have rushed to the law enforcement market, perhaps in favour of maximising shareholder value, and in doing so putting people potentially at risk. For example, IBM, Amazon, and Microsoft admitted their failure to produce bias-free automatic facial recognition software and have withdrawn its sale to law enforcement agencies. So the tech giants, you could accuse them of putting biased software in the hands of biased users, which magnified the worst case scenario if AI is irresponsibly released without strong safeguards for its use in high-risk applications. But the blunt instrument currently used to remove bias is to get rid of the evidence of bias. But AI is highlighting societal and governance problems, such as the lack of diversity in the development process and gaps in the legislation and ethical frameworks. Effective ethical deployment of AI can only happen if both the technology and the implementations are trusted. In the professional security industry, AI is already trusted by users in multiple sectors to do the job within current legal frameworks. But these frameworks need to go further to accommodate the changing face of innovation. I just want to mention the European Commission's high-level experts group on artificial intelligence created 7 guiding principles in their document Ethics and Guidelines for Trustworthy AI. These principles include looking at human oversight, technical robustness, privacy, transparency, diversity, societal well-being, and accountability, and may form the basis for a global framework for human-centric approach to ensure AI continues to bring value to businesses and workers and citizens while respecting fundamental rights, human autonomy, and decision-making. So finally, if AI technologies are to be used by law enforcement, these frameworks need to accommodate the high-risk applications transparently and adhere to the highest ethical standards and be subject to independent oversight.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, panel, for your opening statements. A lot of insight there. Let's get straight to the questions. And Keith Nielsen has asked, is AI and facial recognition technology compromised by current Chinese manufacturer integrity? I guess we don't have to just put the word China in there. Is it compromised by integrity? Let's come to Nick Fisher first. Nick, your thoughts on that?
Personally, I don't think so. I think there's a lot of political rhetoric in there. It depends on who's providing the algorithmic data, where the data's held, where the clouds, where you hold and store your data, and equally, I think it depends, as Pauline alluded to, the transparency in terms of how you're using that data, in terms of the proportionality and disclosures of how you go about managing and holding that data. So no, I don't think so.
What about you, Mohammed? Do you think so?
I agree with Nick as well. I think like in China, for example, the government owns several large AI companies, but then the people of China are aware of this, and that's the society they live in. Whereas in Europe and the USA, companies have to, adhere to strict privacy laws, which means any UK or US company developing facial recognition is not simply going to share your data with the public. So, in principle,
okay,
yes.
Pauline, you seem to think there was an integrity issue in your opening statement.
Yeah, I was referring to IBM and others who withdrew their facial recognition software from sale to law enforcement agencies after it was discovered that there might be bias in the data and the algorithm as a result. I think it's very important to separate out the technology and how it's developed from the implementation. And I think we've all alluded to the fact that we want really good, robust frameworks in place, but those already exist. And the implementations are already in the private industry within these frameworks. The technology itself is at risk if it doesn't have proper oversight, and that's seen in the use of non-diverse data sets to develop. And this is about awareness and correcting the problems now that we're aware that they may exist in some of these data sets.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, let me just put it to you as well, Jake, because this issue of lack of trust is a biggie. And I think part of the problem is that if you read the papers, the public are getting fed the idea there's major things to be concerned about here, and they don't need to be too persuaded of the concern. And in some ways, this is undermining trust in the whole security sector, or technologies across the security sector. Jake, would you agree? And I guess you in your opening statement alluded to the fact that these have got to be challenged.
Yeah, so I think there is the reporting on this issue is becoming a problem, because in many cases based on misconceptions about how the technology is worked and actually employed in the real world. And I think that is creating a trust problem. And that's actually, I think, one thing we can do as an industry and is to promote policies that's going to bridge that gap with public trust to ensure the public that the technology is being used responsibly. And going back to the previous question, we're in a situation right now where the leaders in this field of facial recognition are not just from China, they're from the United States, from Europe and other places as well. The US National Institutes for Standards and Technology, NIST, has a evaluation program for facial recognition. It's been ongoing for about 20 years. But if you look at the top performers of that in those tests for accuracy, it does include some Chinese companies, but as well as others from across the world. I think it's very important that leadership in this field is not voluntarily ceded, because I think one of the best ways to ensure the technology is used responsibly is to make sure that those responsible companies are the ones that are providing it.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, we may well come back to it, but let's, in true webinar style, move on to the next question. And I'm going to take the question from Paul Basson, who changes tack completely. And I'll come to you first, Pauline, on this one. What about the role of the insurance industry in this? Now, when we start to look at stakeholders, it strikes us, many people, I think, that they have a stake in getting it right, and yet their influences seem to be somewhat mooted. Your thoughts, Pauline? Are they a relevant influence to bring about positive change in some way?
In my experience in video surveillance, generally not. The video surveillance industry has added value for its users for different reasons, and the insurers have been very slow to adopt and recognise video surveillance as a valid means of reducing loss. However, in the case of the use of AI, the insurers might be interested in the fact that the industry is looking at traceability, that authenticity of video is starting to be questioned, as we're seeing very credible deep fakes appearing. And I think that because the technology landscape is changing, the insurers need to adapt and change with that. So to answer your question, I found them kind of disinterested in this, but I think that will change.
Let me come to you, Nick, because of course, in some ways, your project originated out of a concern about theft and insurance claims. Nick, your thoughts on this? I mean, the role of the insurance sector.
I'd agree with Pauline entirely, and having spent all my career in retail, retail's now got to a position, if I take that one sector, where they almost self-insure now. You know, it's the premium of reporting crime is become too costly. So you hear retailers talk about shrinkage budgets and absorbing this cost into the budget. And where we've seen facial recognition deployed, commoditized and deployed in retail estates, and we've got a number of retail estates out there with FaceWatch, they're seeing significant reductions almost immediately. We haven't got one business who's got less than a 25% reduction in crime within 90 days of deployment, which means that is almost their future insurance premium, rather than it's a mandatory requirement in retail to have CCTV cameras and insurance. I know that, but I don't see the insurance companies per se being influential today in the adoption of FR technology.
But again, the question isn't it, why not?
It's probably not qualified enough to answer that. If I'm honest, I don't know. I think it's because the history of reporting crime seems to be. There's too much apathy for reporting crime now, so it doesn't actually filter down to the insurance companies in the end, I don't think.
Okay, let me come to Mohammed. Different question, Mohammed, and we may well come back to some of these issues. And a question from Steve Gardner, and Steve's asking about the relationship between technology and physical presence, and this has cropped up on previous webinars, Mohammed, right, where some are arguing the great thing about technology is you can reduce the cost of your frontline worker, and others are saying, well, wait a minute, that's neither desirable or practical. Steve's question is, can technology replace the human on the front line and save all the costs, or is it an enhancer in some way? Mohammed?
So I don't think technology will replace people, and to answer that question, I'll try to explain what I think technology is good at and what humans are good at. So machine learning fundamentally is good where you have several examples, several thousands and millions of examples, whereas humans are really good at making decisions in uncertainty. So Martin, if I show you something that you've never seen before, as a security person, you can still make a guess and say, look, I think that's a risk. Whereas if an AI system has never seen an example of a new type of break-in, the AI system will miss that. So I think we should use AI when you have a lot of repetitive work, and then use humans, or AI should free up human time for things where we don't have a lot of examples and more nuanced cases.
Okay, Jake, I'm going to ask you that question. It's a massive one, actually. It's cropped up quite a bit in the previous 24 webinars. And in some ways, once again, it doesn't enable us to get our views of technology in the right perspective. This relationship between humans and technology. Your thoughts, Jake?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess, again, staying in the context of facial recognition, I think there is a misconception that facial recognition is being used to make automated decisions in high-risk applications. That is simply not the case. So automated facial recognition automates the process of photo comparison, but any kind of high-risk application, such as law enforcement investigations we were talking about earlier, there is a human decision maker that this tool is helping to make identifications. And so, and I think that's certainly also the case for many of the security applications I've seen, the role of technology is to help enhance the capabilities of the person that's responsible for safety of a facility, for example. But there's no just automated decisions that are made based on the technology.
Okay.
Martin, can I just add a point? I think there's a couple of things. I think that's a lot of what civil liberties will imply. They'll imply that the technology decides, and the technology doesn't decide. The technology is a fantastic enabling tool. I think there is an exception where it would reduce some cost, and that is in certain environments where you have man guarding, guys at the front of the door who you pay, I don't know, $30,000, $40,000 a year. Some of that can be displaced by facial recognition. But obviously there still needs to be a human to intervene at some point in that store, because it's not always the security guards at the front of the store who do the job. We've seen experiences of that where deployment's been funded by the reduction in the man guard, who's only there X amount, he can only be there 40 hours a week, whereas the facial recognition's there every day. Okay, thank you. It's an interesting topic. Thank you, Stephen, for your question. Let me move on. The questions are coming in thick and fast. Jerry Shields. Now, it's a long question. I'm going to simplify this for you, Pauline, for me actually. But the question comes about the point upon which technologies are purchased. And at the design stage, one can see the benefits of AI and facial recognition being built in. The question comes after the event and implementing these retrospectively, because it's more difficult to justify the expenditure. And it's also difficult then to justify the advantages when you've got to add and integrate later. Pauline, is that a legitimate concern with these types of technologies? I think any technology which is mitigating the risk of crime, of the unknown, it is a challenge at times to justify the benefits over the cost. But in a world whereby we don't just measure business performance and people's performance through the amount of profit that is made, companies are looking at this corporate and social responsibilities, and safety of people in a premises couldn't be, higher on the agenda right now. So implementing technologies, for example, to help with social distancing, to use facial recognition technology to help contactless entry to buildings be put in place. How do you actually put a bottom line number on that, justify it? Because if your workforce goes down with COVID, you're not going to be able to produce anything. So, it's in the interest of the businesses to think about these things and take a much wider view of what's going on, and also the reputational effect. So it's soon going to become commonplace that it is a thing to be done to use these technologies to help the people focus their time on the right things and to make places safer, so we can all return some kind of normality with COVID. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to ask Mohammed you that question. You seem a good person to ask this question to. I guess it's a bit more your world too. Mohammed, we're talking here about justifying the expenditure afterwards, the return on investment, the value proposition. Your thoughts, Mohammed?
Sure. So I can only speak about our industry, and it's very simple. So we sell our software to security companies that employ people to respond to alarms, and these are video alarms. And the ROI is very simple. If using our solution removes 80% of the video traffic, you can easily translate that into man hours saved. And I would say for most technologies, you can put a business case together that this is my problem. I spend X amount of hours on this problem, and technology can take this time away. And that's how I would approach it. Okay, I mean, thank you for that. I'm going to come back to you. Charles Olu from Kenya, who was on the panel a few weeks ago, Mohammed, has got a question. And it's about making sure that clients buy the right technology for the right purpose. Now, I wanted to go away from you because you're telling me you'll only sell the right technology to the right person, of course, but out there is a tendency, isn't there? There's so much that buyers confused. I remember giving a talk a few years ago, very, very quickly, to an audience. And one guy came up to me afterwards and said to me, Martin, I think you're a bit naive. And his point was, look, I'm the best CCTV installer in the world. But if I go to a client and the client says, I want a big fence, it needs a big fence, I don't sell fences. So I'm going to try and sell him the best CCTV I can. And the point is
that that's a commercial reality that also undermines trust in the sector. And Giles's question is about how we get over that problem, if at all it's possible.
Yeah, that's a hard one, right? Everyone wants to close a sale. And if a customer has a problem X, and if you think you can hack your solution to somehow solve that problem, as a salesperson, you will try to close that sale. I think as companies, the most important thing is customer trust, really understanding the customer's problem and being upfront about the capabilities of the solution you are selling. Being upfront that, look, my solution does 8 out of the 10 things you need. And ask them the question, leave the decision to the customer. If the customer makes a buying decision knowing fully well that these are the limitations, this is what I'm buying, I think that's fair.
Well, it is. It'd be interesting to know how often that's the reality, though, at the shop. And let me come to Nick. You sell technologies, Nick, or your company does. I mean, this is a big end. Of course, I'm not so thoughtful about what you personally would do, Nick. So I'm sure you do the right thing, but it's an industry-wide. It's a problem. It's an issue, Nick.
I think in fairness, Mohammed nailed it. It's a commercial reality that you sit in front of a client who's got a specific proposition or a broad range of propositions, be it fencing, artificial intelligence, cameras, CCTV. They'll endeavour to direct you towards the proposition that they've got to sell. That's just the commercial realities of it. An honest and reasonable trader and someone who's dealing with integrity will ask the client what they're trying to achieve and trying to direct them towards the proposition that best suits what they're trying to overcome, whether it's violence in store or shrinkage or whatever. You'd expect somebody to do that because they're not going to retain the customers for very long if they missell the product, especially technology products.
Okay, well, in some ways that's right, Nick, because people spend the technology, you don't find out the problems till later. But there we are, that's a problem across technology. Pauline, I'm going to give you just a chance to make a few comments on this, just very briefly if you would, because I want to move on to legislation.
So the right fit of technology to solve the problem. It sounds like a consultation, a kind of sales issue there. Whether the right technology is sold is very much dependent on whether the right questions are asked about the problems and the issues that are being suffered. A company that doesn't have a solution to that problem you could argue they should walk away from that. And, again, that's about integrity. But that doesn't always happen. But the companies that do that through, promoting the fact that they do the right thing, that word gets around. And those guys that provide technology just for the sake of it, don't actually stick around. So I kind of echo the points that have already been made actually by Nick and Mohammed.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Well, this is a biggie actually. On next Thursday, we have 2 offenders coming in to talk to us on our panel, just 2 of them, one a prolific burglar and one a prolific armed robber, in the past at least, that's what they say. And they're going to be talking about technology. And one of the things they've been saying is that you just got to look for weaknesses. And if you can find those, you're going to be, it plays in your favour. We'll leave that one till next week. Jake, I'm going to come to a question to you from Aman Panu. And the more general question, Jake, is about the role of legislation, particularly in the use of facial recognition. And you raised that in your opening statement. And he references US Senate Bill 847. But the point is, can the legislation be used to regulate some of the concerns there is about bias? Richard Franken's raised this question as well separately in a separate context. Is legislation a way of doing that? And therefore, perhaps solving some of the broad concerns that exist in the United States and elsewhere about this technology at the moment. Jake.
Sure. So I think it can, and I think one way to do that is, public sector applications of this technology have the most propensity to be high risk, applications where you would have more concerns about the performance of the technology. So in the public sector, the government should make sure that they're only buying the most accurate technology available. And, as we see, I mentioned earlier the accuracy tests that our NIST organization does here. And it turns out that some of the most well-known US federal government programs like the Customs and Border Protection and the use by the FBI, for example, they're already using the most accurate technologies that NIST had looked at the demographic variation in performance across all of these algorithms and found that there's undetectable differences for the highest performing ones. And luckily, we're already using those, but it shows you that there is a wide variation between at least the algorithms that are being developed as far as their demographic performance. And so there is a way to know how well those are doing. And certainly, I think, you know, both public and private sector have an obligation to make sure they're using the most accurate technology for the specific application that they're employing it with, because those performance measures are going to vary really depending on the specific application.
And what about specifically the point about legislation, though, Jake? I mean, is legislation a way of overcoming the real life concerns of people, or is it just going to be a showcase to make it look better than it really is? Can legislation do this for us?
What I was saying is that legislation can require the government to only purchase high performing technology. So that would be one way to get at that issue. But also we need to support those kind of testing activities that actually provide the information we need to know how accurate a technology is. And so that's another thing that we can do from the public policy perspective. But I will say, I think the whole issue of bias in FFR technology specifically, was based largely on some media reporting about just a couple of studies that were done over the past couple of years. And in one case, they were looking at facial analysis technology and reporting that, you know, 35% of the time it showed the system made the wrong judgment about the gender or the race of the person. But that's not even facial recognition, right? Facial recognition is comparing two photos for verification or identification. And so that unfortunately has been misconstrued to make people think there's this 30% misidentification rate, when really that's not the case at all. And the NIST report showed that the accuracy is much, much more uniform, but there's still an issue. I mean, I think the majority of technology they tested did have differences, and that's something we need to work on.
Jake, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to move on because I've got a question here from Glenn Kitteringham. I'm going to come to Pauline first. I'll read you the question actually. I want to come to get the panel's views on this one though, because it's about whether it's all effective or not. Technology companies never talk about the necessary administration management by a human of all the systems. They are constantly pushing into the security section. Security industry says, systems are only as good as the humans adding data into them. And that's quite aside from the ethics issue, as I think Pauline pointed out earlier. But the point is this: these systems are often overrated and in many cases fail to live up to their promises, Glenn argues. Do you acknowledge this as an issue? And second, what's to be done about the lack of trust of clients in terms of them understanding these shortcomings? So let me come to you first, Pauline, because Glenn's perhaps hit the nail on the head as far as some people are concerned as being some of the central problems on this issue. Pauline.
Okay, well, you know, I think that it's a very valid point. You know, if you've got a bunch of technologies producing data that doesn't tell you anything, then you're not going to learn anything. You know, the automation of the analysis of sensor technology, it has to add value to the process. And in order to do that, you need to not just switch on the device and leave it and expect it to do a job. You know, humans are all around that. And, you know, I'm a great believer in the fact that humans develop AI to help humans and automatic facial recognition for that purpose as well. So the problem needs to be defined, the human problem needs to be defined. And then the application of the technology is very closely aligned to that problem. And if you do that, then you're more likely to get a better result. You know, if you just plug in some technology and leave it, don't expect it to do the job, because it requires human configuration, management, operation. It requires an operational process to respond. What happens if we get an alarm of this kind? Who's going to do what? You know, it's there to augment the activities of humans. It's not there to replace the activities of humans. And to just you know, I know companies do this. They plug in the tech and they just expect it to do something. But actually the tech can't do anything without the human saying it must do something. So that's my position on it.
Thank you very much indeed. Mohammed, coming to you, a different question from Bipin Patel. I hope I've pronounced that right. And the question is, Mohammed makes a very good comment as technology should be used to free up front-facing decision being better made in real time, Pauline's point as well. Do we have examples, Mohammed, of how that's been done during COVID-19 crisis?
Yeah, I can certainly speak about our customers.
Very brief, if you wouldn't mind, Mohammed.
Yeah, so in COVID, most security companies, they had to monitor 24/7 instead of 12-hour shifts before COVID, because businesses are shut for longer. As a result, they were faced with a crisis where they either need to hire more people or they can use technology to do that job for them. And that's certainly something we saw with our customers. That's just one example I have.
Yeah, I mean, related to this, and I'll come to Nick for a follow-up on this. Simon Adcock's made the point, Mohammed, that about the value of building up a long-term relationship with clients. Now, clearly, I guess that is where the money comes, and that, in a sense, puts responsibility on the supplier. The fact that you need to build up, that's where you're going to make your money, by clients keep coming back. I mean, Simon's point is that there is a reality, though, that some installers, he's put it, don't think like this, and therein undermines the sort of the sector perception, the sector reality. Is that true? Do you think that is the problem, a problem?
I think certainly so, and I'll tie this down to the shift in one-off sales models to recurring revenue models. So now, as an industry, the security industry is moving towards, or more interested in, recurring revenue, because they realize if you have a customer for 10 years, you'll make up a lot more money than you do a 20,000 job. And so installers are thinking of this shift, that how do they maintain these longer term relationships? Also, the security industry, it's, people talk. So if you ruin your reputation, it's unlikely that you'll continue to be thriving in 5-10 years from now.
Yeah, absolutely. Nick, I'll give you a chance just to answer on this, because of course you're in a world where things are moving fast. Nick, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, aligned to Mohammed, exactly the same. We can commoditize facial recognition, but at FaceWatch, we'll only allow accredited partners to sell it. That's people we've trained on how to sell it. So you can't just buy it off the shelf, go fit it in a business and let them get on with it. It gets accredited, because of course we hold, manage and store the data on behalf of our clients. So the relationship starts at the point the installation happens, and we can track and manage all that data for them on their behalf going forward. So I think it's imperative that it's not a commoditized product that you just sell, moves off the shelf and shifts. And I think that's the transition in the security world. Definitely from just selling a box and making margin and walking away, to building a relationship all the way through, from FaceWatch holding the data right through to the integrator reseller, having that relationship with the customer, because you say you're going to keep using this product. And to Jake's point, you're only going to survive if you're selling product that's high quality, that's at the top of the NIST report. These guys are releasing algorithmic changes in NIST about every 12 weeks. Our supply has an update every 12 weeks. The accelerated level of which the quality of these algorithms are moving forward, so the accuracy is getting better. Very accurate technology now, where you can wear mask, glasses, hat, and it'll still recognize a face. So it's about making sure that you build a relationship and you own the relationship, for the life with that customer. Thank you very much indeed. I did say to my panel, by the way, audience, before we started, we all met just beforehand, and I said, I'll give you a chance to make a final statement, but it might be very quick. And it is going to be very quick, chaps, because we're running out of time always, and we've got more questions which we won't be able to get to. So let me come to each of you and just ask in 10 seconds, if you would, your final thoughts on this topic. Mohammed, just your final sum up thoughts from today.
Sure. So I would say, as a founder of a company, I think the responsibility on us is to really communicate and educate the market on what is possible with technology, what are the limitations, and yeah, really build that trust with the customer, so we're not mis-selling things. Yeah. Sounds very good to me, Mohammed. Nick, your final statement, please.
Yeah, mine is that AI is not an absolute. It requires a human at the end of it. The last mile is always about the human intervention, the judgment, but it's a fantastic enabler, and we need to look at the opportunities that it can help us with.
Thank you very much indeed. You too, Jake, your final comment, please. Just 10 seconds if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, sure. Agree with everything that was just said. We did a survey of our members last year. 80% are using AI in their development of new products. This is really a game changer. It's allowing the industry to shift from reactive to proactive mode. That's going to help people. It's going to save lives. It's going to protect our citizens. But we do need to be careful in how we market, develop, and sell these technologies. We're honest about their limitations and the advantages as well.
Thank you very much indeed. It seems only appropriate to leave the final comment from today to you, Pauline.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm a firm believer that these technologies are being used ethically and safely within the private sector, and the private sector leads the way. But I would like to see an ethical use, the ethical use of AI within global frameworks, and then sector-specific standards, which are then supported through regulation and legislation, and with a particular focus on those high-risk applications, such as the use of law enforcement, automatic facial recognition in law enforcement. That's different. Okay, you know, these applications for AI and automatic facial recognition in the private sector are delivering day after day. They're doing a great job, they're proven, they're tried and tested, and ultimately they'll make these places safe against the backdrop of COVID. So that's my position.
Pauline, thank you. My panel, thank you very much indeed. And thank you very much indeed to the audience. We have been able to get through all the questions, always a good sign, I think. Very grateful to everybody. It's been an engaging conversation. My grateful thanks to the BSAA for sponsoring this session. It was a great choice. Mike Reddington presumably was behind that. Thank you for that. Thank you to my supporters too. Just to let you know, OSPA nominations around the world are open. I would please ask each of you on this webinar, if you know someone who's doing an outstanding job in India, US, Benelux, Kenya, Romania, Australia, Germany, or UK, do please nominate them. It's very, very important we identify who the outstanding performers are. We go through it all again next week. Every Tuesday and Thursday we're with you. And next Tuesday, how essential is security? Rethinking perceptions. The thing that's dogged the security industry, it came up again today, is this issue about perceptions. And we'll be tackling that very issue on Tuesday. And on Thursday, we've got a former armed robber, former burglar, coming to talk to us about their views of security and what they would be doing if they were active during this period of COVID-19. My grateful thanks again to the audience, my grateful thanks to the panel and to the BSIA and to all of you for taking part. Wherever you are in the world, stay safe.